Welcome to the Frontline, where history comes to life. In the early 1500s, Cairo still looked like the heart of an empire. Minarets rose over the rooftops, their call to prayer drifting across a city crowded with scholars, merchants, craftsmen, and warriors. Markets spilled into the streets, crowded with spices from Yemen, silk from India, and caravans arriving from deep inside Africa. In the citadel, armored Mamluk cavalry drilled in the courtyards, their tall lances flashing in the sun, their horses prancing with the confidence of a class that had ruled Egypt for centuries. But behind the noise and movement, something was shifting. The Mamluk state looked strong, yet its foundations were cracking. Inside the citadel's halls, the emirs whispered about money running thin, taxes arriving late, and quarrels breaking out between rival factions. The Mamluk system had always depended on unity among its warrior elites, but now every powerful emir behaved like a prince, plotting against the others, building private followings and weakening the authority of their sultan. Courts filled with intrigue instead of strategy, and decisions that once took hours now dragged on for months because every faction demanded its share. In the army, training drills still looked impressive, but their weapons had barely changed in generations. Tall armor, curved swords, and lances still defined their strength, even as the world around them moved on. Meanwhile, the lifeline of the Mamluk economy, the Red Sea trade, began to crumble. News spread of Portuguese caravels appearing in the Indian Ocean, their cannons blasting apart Muslim ships near India and cutting into the lucrative spice routes that had fed Cairo's treasury for centuries. Merchants in the city's Khan al-Khalili bazaar watched their profits shrink as European ships avoided the Red Sea entirely, sailing around Africa instead. Every missing ship meant less tax revenue, and less tax revenue meant fewer soldiers, fewer bribes, and fewer ways to hold the state together. Across the eastern horizon, in the heart of Constantinople, another ruler watched all of this with growing interest. Selim I, newly victorious over the Safavids at Chaldiran, had earned a reputation for ruthlessness and speed. He had seized power from his own father, executed rivals without hesitation, and reorganized the Ottoman state to strengthen his grip. Unlike the aging Mamluk sultans in Cairo, Selim was young, sharp, and driven by a sense of destiny. He believed the Ottomans were chosen to lead the Muslim world, and that Syria and Egypt, rich, historic, and strategically placed, naturally belonged beneath the Ottoman banner. From his palace in Constantinople, he studied reports from the south. He saw the Mamluk weaknesses clearly: the infighting, the economic decline, the outdated armies. To Selim, the situation looked not like a threat, but an opportunity. If the Ottomans controlled Egypt, they would control the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. They would control the Red Sea routes that linked Africa and India, and they would remove the only rival dynasty still able to claim leadership over the Islamic world. But to the Mamluks, Selim's rise felt like a challenge to their honor. They had been protectors of the holy cities for generations. They had destroyed the Mongols at Ain Jalut, saved the Middle East from collapse, and built Cairo into one of the richest cities on earth. The idea of paying tribute to the Ottoman Sultan was unthinkable. When Selim sent envoys demanding respect and cooperation, the Mamluk court answered with arrogance. Some envoys were mocked, others were sent home with insults instead of agreements. In the coffee houses and military barracks of Cairo, soldiers laughed at the idea of an Ottoman threat. "We beat the Mongols," they said. "What could Anatolian peasants possibly do to us?" The insult cut deep in Constantinople. Selim's pride was legendary, and the Mamluks had struck right at the heart of it. Letters grew sharper, diplomacy grew colder. Each side spoke about honor, legitimacy, and divine right, but beneath the surface, both knew the argument was not about words. It was about who would control the future of the Middle East. By the time the final messages arrived, neither side expected peace. Mamluk diplomats insisted that their sultan was the rightful guardian of Islam. Ottoman scribes replied that Selim was the sword of God, chosen to bring unity where weakness had taken root. Cairo's refusal to acknowledge Ottoman supremacy made war inevitable. In Constantinople, Selim walked through the armories personally, inspecting cannons cast after the victory at Chaldiran. He ordered janissaries to prepare for a long march, artillery teams to ready their guns, and cavalry to prepare fresh horses. Across Anatolia, drums echoed through villages as troops assembled. Supply wagons creaked into long columns. Engineers checked the roads leading toward Aleppo and Damascus. The empire began to move. The Mamluks believed their cavalry would stop any northern army long before it reached Egypt. Selim believed their confidence would be their downfall. By late 1516, the decision was made. Selim I mounted his horse beneath the walls of Constantinople, looked south toward the deserts and cities of the Mamluk Sultanate, and decided the future of two empires would be settled not by envoys, but by war. Selim's army came down through the mountains of Anatolia like a dark tide, a long line of marching men, gunpowder wagons, horsemen, camels, and cannon barrels rumbling over the stone roads. The janissaries marched in tight ranks, their matchlocks carried upright, their steps steady and perfectly timed. Behind them rolled the heavy Ottoman field guns, each one pulled by teams of oxen, each one capable of tearing open a cavalry charge with a single blast. Sipahi cavalry formed the wings, armored but flexible, ready to move wherever Selim pointed. The entire host moved without hesitation, without confusion, like one massive creature stretching from horizon to horizon. Dust rose in great clouds behind them as they entered Syria, swallowing villages and orchards in a brown haze that meant war had come. Ahead of them lay an older world. The Mamluk Sultanate had always relied on the strength of its cavalry, warriors raised from boyhood to fight with lance and sword, sitting high on powerful Arabian horses, their armor shining and their banners sweeping in the wind. In single combat or small battles, they were unmatched. Their charge was a thing of fear, a wall of steel and horseflesh. But their world had not kept pace with the new age of gunpowder. Cannons, muskets, and battlefield discipline had begun to reshape war, and in this new world the Mamluk army looked like a splendid relic, beautiful and deadly, but vulnerable. When Selim's scouts reported that the Mamluk Sultan, Kansa al-Guri, had marched north with his full force, the Ottomans did not hesitate. They pushed south at full speed. Setting camp on the plain called Marj Dabiq, a wide stretch of open land north of Aleppo, perfect ground for gunpowder to meet cavalry. At dawn, the air hung heavy with heat and dust. Mamluk drums echoed across the plain, answered by the steady beat of Ottoman marches. The Mamluk line glittered in the sunlight, rows of armored horses, tall helmets, curved blades flashing as the cavalry formed up for a charge that had broken armies for centuries. Behind them, infantry and archers tried to form ranks, but the Mamluk army had never mastered the discipline of large formations. Everyone looked toward the Sultan's tent, waiting for the signal. On the Ottoman side, janissaries moved into position with calm precision, planting stakes in the ground, loading their matchlocks with practiced motions. Artillery crews swabbed the barrels, packed powder, rolled forward the great bronze guns. Selim watched from a hilltop, silent and unmoving, as if the entire battle were unfolding exactly as he had imagined. Then the Mamluk horn sounded, sharp and proud. The cavalry began to move, first at a trot, then faster, dust exploding around the horses' hooves, the ground trembling beneath the weight of thousands of riders. Lances lowered. Shouts rose. The Mamluk charge, the same charge that had crushed the Mongols at Ain Jalut 2.5 centuries before, thundered across the plain toward the Ottoman front. The Ottomans did not move. They waited until the horsemen were close enough that the details of their armor could be seen clearly. Then Selim raised his hand. The cannons fired. The earth shook as smoke burst from the Ottoman line. Iron shot hurled into the cavalry ranks, tearing through horses, riders, and armor alike. Gaps opened instantly in the charge. Still the Mamluks pushed forward, trying to close the distance, but the janissaries stepped out from behind their stakes, matchlocks raised, and unleashed a wave of gunfire. Smoke wrapped the field in a choking cloud. Horses screamed. Riders fell with shattered armor and broken limbs. The old world crashed into the new, and the new world did not yield. The Mamluk line staggered. Some units tried to turn, others pushed forward blindly into the gunfire. Sultan Kansa al-Ghuri, overcome by the heat and the shock of seeing his proud cavalry collapsed from his horse. Confusion spread as rumors of his death raced through the ranks. Without the Sultan's banner guiding them, parts of the Mamluk army broke almost immediately. Selim ordered the advance. Ottoman cavalry swept around the flanks. Janissaries marched forward through the smoke, cutting down survivors with steel and fire. Within hours, the Mamluk army, the force that had ruled Egypt and Syria for more than 200 years, dissolved into scattered bands fleeing south. By sunset, Marj Dabiq belonged to the Ottomans. When the news reached Aleppo, the city surrendered without resistance. Damascus followed soon after. Ottoman troops marched through its gates in perfect order, their discipline a stark contrast to the chaos the Mamluks left behind. Town after town along the Levanten coast opened its gates, knowing the old masters had fallen and the new ones offered stability. Selim took his time securing Syria, placing governors, reorganizing taxes, and resting his army, but his gaze never left the south. Past Gaza, past the Sinai, past every strip of sand and ancient caravan trail, lay Cairo, the jewel he intended to claim. For centuries, the Mamluks believed the Sinai desert would shield them. Its heat, distance, and lack of water had stopped more than one invading empire. Selim was not deterred. As winter approached, the Ottoman camp stirred again. Engineers prepared wells. Caravan masters gathered supplies. Artillery teams checked their guns. Janissaries repacked their ammunition. The army turned toward the desert. The march to Egypt, something the Mamluks believed impossible, was about to begin. The march into Egypt began with a sight no one in the Mamluk world ever expected to witness. Across the endless beige sweep of the Sinai, where caravans moved slowly and armies traditionally died of thirst long before reaching the Nile, the Ottoman Empire advanced in tight, disciplined columns. Janissaries walked in long files with their matchlocks balanced on their shoulders, their white caps stark against the burning sky. Engineers rode ahead marking the route, digging wells, and hammering stakes into sand to guide the columns. Artillery crews dragged cannons on wooden sledges, ropes biting into their hands as oxen strained to pull the bronze barrels over dunes that shifted beneath their feet. Behind them came the supply caravans, camels carrying flour, gunpowder, dried meat, water skins, carpenters, tools, spare wheels, everything needed to keep an army alive. Every morning, the sun rose over an army that looked more like a moving fortress than a force in transit. Dust hung in the air behind them for miles, a pale banner marking the path of conquest. No empire had crossed the Sinai like this in centuries. Heat rolled across the desert in slow waves. Men marched with cloth wrapped around their faces, sweat soaking through armor and uniforms. Still, the columns held together. Each night tents sprang up in precise rows. Cannons were cleaned, horses watered. Scouts returned with reports of distant Bedouin camps or Mamluk posts trying to determine whether the march was real or some illusion. When the Ottomans reached the wells at Al-Arish, they did not pause. They refilled their skins, rested a few hours, then pressed deeper into the desert. Those watching began to understand. This army was not deterred by nature, distance, or tradition. Selim wanted Egypt, and the desert would not stop him. Word of the advance moved ahead of the soldiers. Villages near the Nile heard rumors carried by desert winds, a great host coming from the north, a force with more cannons than Egypt had ever seen, janissaries ranked like walls of iron. In Cairo, the newly crowned Sultan, Tumen Bey II, gathered advisors in the citadel and listened to conflicting reports, some saying the Ottomans were exhausted and starving, others insisting they were moving with impossible speed. Tumen Bey sent riders to call the remaining Mamluk emirs to arms. Across the countryside, bells and drums sounded as scribes read urgent orders in marketplaces. Old cavalry units mustered again, tall men in lamellar armor, on horses bred for sudden charges and duels, not the grinding pressure of gunpowder warfare. Black tents rose outside villages as campfires flickered along the riverbanks. Egypt was preparing for the greatest battle fought on its soil since the days of Timur. The geography of the Nile Valley shaped everything. Palm groves lined the canals, their green fronds swaying above narrow dirt roads. Irrigation ditches cut the fields into patchworks of bright green and dark brown. Farmers paused from their work, shading their eyes as strange smoke appeared far in the north, columns rising slowly like shadows of the coming army. The Ottomans advanced from the desert into this landscape of water and life, dropping from the dry wasteland into the heart of Egypt like a storm breaking without warning. Tumen Bey chose to make his stand near Ridnia, northeast of Cairo. There, trenches had been dug, wooden stakes hammered into the ground, and a few cannons, the best Egypt could assemble, placed behind earthen mounds. The Mamluk cavalry waited behind these defenses, their horses restless, their riders gripping lances with hands that had held them since childhood. The Sultan rode through the lines, a tall figure on a white horse, calling to his men, urging them to remember their ancestors, to hold the old honor of Egypt against this new force from the north. But Selim did not intend to give them the luxury of choosing the moment of battle. Before dawn, while the eastern horizon was still purple and the call to prayer had not yet floated through the air, the Ottoman vanguard struck. Cannon fire shattered the silence first, bright flashes in the half-dark, thunder rolling across the plain. Mamluk sentries ran backward shouting warnings as shells tore into the trenches, sending dirt and men flying. Janissaries advanced behind the artillery, stepping over broken stakes, pushing through gaps in the defensive lines. The Mamluk cannons answered, but their shots were scattered, their gunners untrained compared to the Ottoman crews who reloaded with practiced speed. Tumen Bey rode straight into the chaos, swinging his sword, shouting commands lost in the roar of gunfire. His cavalry charged again and again, tall shadows passing through smoke, spears lowering as they smashed into Janissary ranks. Horses fell screaming as musket volleys tore into them. The Mamluks fought fiercely, one-on-one, each man trying to break through by sheer skill and courage. But the battlefield had changed. Gunpowder controlled the rhythm of the fight now. Formations, volleys, artillery, not single warriors. The Ottoman lines bent but did not break. As the sun rose higher, Selim sent forward his reserve wings. Ottoman cavalry swept around the flanks, closing the trap. Mamluk resistance spiraled into pockets of hand-to-hand combat. Blades flashed, shields splintered, and muskets fired at point-blank range, their smoke mixing with dust until the field looked like a shifting white-gray cloud cut by silhouettes of men still fighting. By midday, the Mamluk defense collapsed. Tumen Bey, still fighting, disappeared into the retreat, his horse lathered in sweat as he fled toward Cairo with the survivors. Behind him, the battlefield lay in ruins, bodies, broken cannons, shattered armor, and the rising cries of Ottoman soldiers calling out victory. The road to Cairo lay open, and the Ottomans, relentless from the desert crossing to the final charge, marched straight toward the beating heart of the Mamluk Empire. Cairo did not fall quietly. When the first Ottoman units pushed through the northern gates, they walked into a city already shaking with panic and fury. Smoke drifted above rooftops in thin gray streams. Shopkeepers barred their doors. Families ran through alleys clutching bundles and small children. Somewhere in the distance, a drumbeat rose, warning, calling, pleading, but it was swallowed by the sharper sound of matchlocks firing in the streets. Janissaries moved in tight formations, their boots thudding on stone, their muskets leveled at every shadow. They advanced through markets packed with overturned stalls, shattered pottery, and the metallic smell of blood mixing with spices spilled into the dirt. Every few steps they fired down alleys where Mamluk horsemen appeared suddenly, riding straight into the gunfire with the same courage that had carried their order for centuries. The narrow streets of Cairo became a battleground. Mamluk cavalry thundered down passages barely wide enough for two men, their swords flashing in the morning light. They leaned low in the saddle, cutting at Janissary ranks, breaking through the first lines before fresh Ottoman infantry closed in behind them. Horses slipped on stone slick with water and blood. Muskets cracked from windows above, sending puffs of smoke into the hot air. Many of the buildings were made of stone and wood, giving defenders countless corners to hide behind. The janissaries fought room to room, jerking doors open, smashing through shutters, finding resistance in every courtyard. The sound of steel rang across the city as traditional Mamluk skill met the relentless precision of the Ottoman war machine. In the Khan al-Khalili market, tables overturned and burning cloth created a haze that hid silhouettes of men striking at each other between stalls. Gunshots echoed beneath the vaulted ceilings of covered bazaars, their sound trapped and amplified until it felt like the whole city was a drum. Some Mamluks fought on foot with curved swords, others charged from horseback whenever a street opened into a square. They knew the city intimately and used it to their advantage, disappearing into alleys before the janissaries could reload. But the Ottomans kept pushing forward, bringing small cannons to blast apart barricades and firing volleys into crowds of defenders who refused to flee. Up in the citadel that crowned Cairo, Selim I sat in a chamber overlooking the chaos, listening to the city tear itself apart. The thick walls muffled some of the noise, but the thunder of gunfire still reached him in steady waves. His commanders entered at intervals, bowing deeply, offering reports of progress. This district secured, that gate taken, that resistance broken. Selim remained motionless, his face stern and unreadable. He had not marched across deserts, fought at Marj Dabiq, and shattered armies for half measures. Egypt would bend fully or not at all. Through the arched window behind him, the smoke from burning buildings curled upward in long black streaks, rising into the sky like signals marking the end of an era. Outside the city walls, Tumen Bey had not accepted defeat. After escaping the battlefield at Ridnia, he led what remained of the Mamluk resistance into the countryside along the Nile. There, the fighting took a new shape, smaller, sharper, more desperate. Mamluk survivors ambushed Ottoman convoys from behind groves of palms, attacking with quick strikes before vanishing into the riverbank villages. They cut bridges, seized food stores, and harassed patrols at night with sudden bursts of arrows and musket fire. Boats on the Nile were attacked at dawn by fighters who emerged silently from reeds, boarded, and disappeared again before the larger Ottoman fleet could respond. Word spread among villagers that the old order was not yet finished, that Tumen Bey still fought. For Selim, this resistance was more dangerous than a battlefield defeat. It threatened to turn Egypt into a long guerrilla war. So the Ottomans tightened their grip. Patrols increased along the river. Outposts were built near ferries. Informants were paid for names. Bit by bit, the noose closed around Tumen Bey's shrinking circle of followers. One night, as the Sultan slept in a small village house near Giza, Ottoman cavalry swept in from multiple directions. Fighting broke out in the dark, shouts, gunshots, the sound of hooves pounding through sand. Tumen Bey escaped once, then twice, but each time the ring around him narrowed. Finally, cornered near the Nile, he was dragged from his horse and seized alive. He was brought to Cairo in chains. When Selim received him, witnesses said he remained silent for a long moment, looking at the man who had been the last sultan of the Mamluks. Tumen Bey was offered a chance to plead for mercy. Instead, he asked only that his people be spared needless suffering. Selim nodded but gave no promises. The Ottoman army had lost too many men. Egypt needed an example. On the morning of his execution, Tumen Bey was led through Cairo toward Bab Zuila, the great southern gate where new Mamluk sultans had once been proclaimed, where ceremonies of power had been held for generations. Crowds gathered along the streets. Some watched silently. Others wept. Many lowered their heads, unwilling to see the final symbol of their old world ending. At the gate, the rope was already tied. Tumen Bey looked up at the towers, then at the people, then at the sky. He did not bow his head. Selim watched from a distance as the body of the last Mamluk sultan was raised above the crowd. The wind tugged at the cloth of his robes as if trying to lift him one last time. Thus ended a dynasty that had ruled Egypt for more than 250 years, its final chapter written not in palaces or battlefields, but on the wooden beams of the city gate where it had once begun. Cairo did not return to silence quickly. Even after Tumen Bey's body was taken down from Bab Zuila and the last pockets of resistance were crushed, The city felt suspended between two eras, one dying, one being built in real time. Ottoman soldiers patrolled markets where merchants reopened their stalls with hesitant hands. The mosques still called out the adhan, but the voices of the muezzins now echoed through streets lined with janissaries instead of Mamluk cavalry. The people of Egypt sensed that something immense had shifted, something deeper than a change of ruler. A world they had lived in for centuries had ended, and another was taking its place. Selim I understood this better than anyone. He had not marched across Syria and the Sinai, fought two massive battles, and toppled an entire warrior aristocracy merely to replace one sultan with another. Egypt was not just another province to him. It was the key to reshaping the balance of the Islamic world. For the first time, Cairo, the city of the Fatimids, the Ayyubids, the Mamluks, was being drawn fully into the orbit of an empire based far to the north, ruled by men who carried titles not carved out of local tradition, but inherited from the thunder of steppe conquest and the discipline of a gunpowder state. The absorption of Egypt into the Ottoman Empire happened quickly on paper, but slowly in reality. Selim appointed Ottoman governors, installed garrisons, and reorganized tax registers almost immediately, but he did not erase the Mamluks entirely. Many of them survived, though their role changed dramatically. The proud cavalrymen who had once dominated Egypt's politics now became timber holders, tax collectors, and local administrators. They retained their horses, their prestige, and their mansions, but they bowed to Istanbul. No longer were they the masters of Egypt. They were now officials within a larger imperial system. Some accepted this begrudgingly, others resentfully, but they all understood the truth. The age of Mamluk independence was over. For Egypt, the consequences would unfold slowly but profoundly. Ottoman rule brought new scholars, new administrators, new tax systems, and new connections to distant cities like Bursa, Aleppo, and Baghdad. Cairo remained a great city, vibrant, wealthy, and culturally alive, but it was no longer the center of a sovereign empire. Instead, it became the southern pillar of one of the world's most powerful states, a jewel in the Ottoman crown, its streets filled with Turkish officials, Mamluk nobles trying to retain influence, and merchants adjusting to new trade routes in a world being reshaped by both European explorers and Ottoman expansion. The fall of the Mamluks did not erase their memory. Their palaces still stood. Their descendants continued to hold power locally. Their stories lived in Cairo's alleys and marketplaces. But the balance of the world had changed. The old medieval order of armored cavalry, independent sultanates, and regional trade networks had given way to centralized gunpowder empires, and Egypt was now firmly part of that transformation. And so, as the dust settled on 1517, and Selim prepared to return to Istanbul with relics, prisoners, and the submission of a once mighty kingdom, a new chapter began for the Nile Valley, one that would last 400 years. When Selim's armies crossed the desert in 1517, they did more than conquer a kingdom. They ended one world, shaped another, and set Egypt on a path that would define the next 4 centuries.